coca leaves, and then in the middle of the 19th century, they discovered cocaine, or they figured out how to synthesize it. Then by the 1880s, of course, give us 20 years and we'll start using it in our medicine, they started producing patented medicines that had cocaine in them. They also had opium and heroin and marijuana and morphine. Since no one really understood about addiction at this time, they just kept doing it. I mean, it's kind of like marijuana is right now. Nobody had a clue how bad it was or what it did to your body. And we didn't have enough evidence to prove anything, and even if we did have the evidence, there wasn't an organization that was accumulating all the information so that we could see how ugly this stuff was. The people that had the biggest problem were women, because they used patented medicines. They used a lot of patented medicines, and the reason they used patented medicines was because they needed energy. So they would take these patented medicines. They would have neuralgia, or they would have various problems, and then they would need to take something for it. And of course, what they took for it was cocaine, or they took the medicines. And as you can see, cocaine toothache drops. It will sure take away your toothache. It does work. People began introducing cocaine into their systems in new ways by injecting intravenously. It introduces the drug into the system in about 30 seconds, so you could inject it. You could snort it, of course. It takes about 2 to 5 minutes to get into your system. Snorting more cocaine is counterproductive, of course, and this is something that you need to understand. It's a vasoconstrictor, so when you snort the stuff, the first amount of cocaine gets into your system, but then it's vasoconstrictor, and it's an extreme vasoconstrictor. And since it's an extreme vasoconstrictor, if you keep snorting more and more of it into your nose, a line of cocaine, then potentially what's going to happen is you're cutting off your blood supply to your nose. In which case you'll get a deviated septum. It'll die. The cartilage is living tissue, and it will die. And if it dies, of course, then the cartilage goes away. It slowly goes away. And of course, I told the story about Linda Ronstadt having her nose reconstructed twice. John Denver had his nose reconstructed once. Died at age 50 in an airplane crash. So it's not going to do you any good, any more good. You snort it, and if you try to take in more, it's just blocked. So you're just wasting the powder. As the cocaine wears off, the nasal passage opens back up. It causes a runny nose. Also causes hemorrhaging if there is any break in your blood vessel. The problem with cocaine is that if it opens up a hemorrhage, it's really hard to stop that hemorrhage. And so we would have to go in and cauterize the blood vessel in order to stop the hemorrhage. You can, well, of course it goes into the nasal passages. Smoking, cocaine-laced cigarettes, of course, were introduced in 1914. Didn't work because cocaine has, it cooks away at a relatively low temperature, so it just didn't work. Because cocaine is a natural substance, it tends to be metabolized very quickly, and its effects dissipate much faster than synthetic stimulants. And this is one of the things that we're going to see as we were talking about methamphetamines and whatnot. It lasts in your system a lot longer than cocaine does. The half-life of cocaine is 30 to 90 minutes, and it is detectable in your urine for about 36 hours after you ingest it. So you got about a day and a half that you're going to be positive on a drug screen. Cocaine is used as a topical anesthetic because it has powerful vasoconstriction capabilities. Since cocaine receptors are found in the smooth muscles of the lungs, cocaine use will cause the bronchi to dilate, and this is a good thing. We can open up your bronchi. Synthetic cocaine products mimic the effects of cocaine for eye, dental, and cutaneous surgeries. Lidocaine, xylocaine, procaine, novocaine, they're all byproducts of cocaine. So, and of course, these are all topicals that we use on people. Cocaine excites the user by blocking the reuptake of neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. The abundance of these neurotransmitters gives the individual a feeling of well-being, mastery, omnipotence, euphoria, and general excitement. That's all the good things that happen, but there are bad things that happen if you use it too much. And we're going to talk about that right now. Cocaine metabolizes fairly rapidly, leaving the four neurotransmitters vulnerable to reuptake when the cocaine is gone. And since you've got all of these acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, you're sort of getting an overcharge of this stuff, and once the cocaine is gone, it doesn't take that long, it only takes about 10 minutes, all of a sudden we have less of this than we did before. So you can imagine the situation that's taking place. Wait a second. Okay. Cocaine's positive effects disappear fairly suddenly after about 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't last that long, but it does give you a pretty good buzz for about 5 to 10 minutes. This absence of the previous feelings is referred to as the crash. There you go, there's a shot for you. And it may last for hours, it may last for days, it may last for weeks. So for 5 to 10 minutes of a buzz, you're depressed for the next week. As stupid as that sounds. They do it anyway. This is very popular, or was very popular, especially in the 80s and 90s with celebrities. So we had a lot of celebrities that were really screwing themselves up with this stuff, including Robin Williams and Linda Ronstadt.
Why is it considered an upward if it's like a short time, and then the depression is longer than the...
Wait until we talk about some of the really good things that happen to you.
Okay.
So why is it an upper? Because it's a stimulant.
Okay.
And it stimulates your central nervous system. That's why it's called an upper.
So the duration of time doesn't really matter?
No. Jesus. This is, if you've ever watched cop shows, you know, they're always trying to figure out if something's heroin or cocaine, and they put it on their gums. What they're doing, it numbs their gums. If it's cocaine, so that's why they're putting it in their mouth.
Who?
The cops.
Oh, no, they got a freaking thing now.
Oh, yeah, they do now, but I mean, in the old days, you'd see them, well, it wasn't that long ago. They just get a little bit on their finger and rub it on their gums to see if it numbed their gums.
I was wondering why they did that. Now I know.
Yeah, it does, and it tastes bitter too. I mean, heroin tastes bitter and so does cocaine. But if you get cocaine in your mouth, of course, if you get it on your tongue, and with all the thumb, you can't pop the tongue's all melted. Cocaine overstimulates the release of dopamine. If this occurs over time, it triggers the fright center in the brain, causing paranoia. Paranoia. Cocaine also overstimulates the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. If this occurs over time, the individual may suffer from lethargy, low blood pressure, and anhedonia. One of my favorite words, anhedonia. A hedonist is somebody that seeks pleasure. And of course means not. So it's somebody who can't find pleasure. They just, it doesn't happen for them. So it's a feeling of the inability to find pleasure. Anhedonia. One of those great words that Dr. Standing Courage would use. Anhedonia. Cocaine causes the overstimulation of serotonin, which not only makes the individual happy, but increases sexual activity as well. Now this is really one of the reasons why a lot of people snort cocaine. They use it as an aphrodisiac. However, it works in the beginning, leads to prolonged erection. These individuals will have sex, literally have sex all night long, and they can do that, but eventually, of course, it all goes away. If this continues to happen over time, the individual may suffer from insomnia, agitation, and severe emotional depression. There we go. Cocaine blocks the metabolism of acetylcholine, increasing alertness, memory, and aggression. If overstimulation occurs over time, the person may suffer from tremors, memory lapses, mental confusion, and possibly hallucinations. So they're kicking themselves into a psychotic state.
Yeah.
Dang, that's rude.
I know, this is so stupid. Some people actually use cocaine as an aphrodisiac, as I said before, since at low doses, it enhances sexual desire and it prolongs ejaculation. However, in some cases, it causes spontaneous ejaculation, which is kind of the opposite of what you're trying to do. In higher doses and with chronic use, cocaine may cause erectile dysfunction and a disinterest in sex. Now, the strange part is that they continue to try to have sex, and then it gets ugly. Then it gets real ugly. Now, remember all of these negative things that this is doing. So, in order for this individual to become sexually excited, now all of a sudden we have BDSM. We have all kinds of horrible things that have to take place in order for this person to find stimulation. As strange as that is, and of course people die because because of some of the things that these wackos are doing.
And you were saying from the beginning that somebody that takes a lot of cocaine, they can't overdose on it, right?
You can't overdose,
Okay.
no. Well, you can't. I mean, it's impossible because when you snort it, it's a vasoconstrictor.
Yeah.
It constricts your blood vessels, or the blood vessels in your nose or in your lungs, and now all of a sudden you can't. The more you snort it, you can't get any more into your system. So you can imagine what's taking place here. This individual has overstimulated themselves to the extent that now they can't perform.
Yeah.
Okay, so now they have to do more and more violent things. Usually it has to do with aggression, because remember, this causes a feeling of a need to be aggressive. So sometimes they'll strangle their partner, they'll beat their partner to death. I mean, really strange, ugly things are taking place, but it's because of the cocaine, and they can't function anymore. Whereas before, remember, they had prolonged ejaculation before. They had prolonged erections.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, they can't get an erection at all. And so who do they blame? Their partner. Exactly. A lack of sexual need may lead to high-risk sexual behavior and unusual sexual practices, since sexual need no longer exists for the individual. They just can't function. So, whereas before it was this wonderful, wonderful aphrodisiac that they were using, now all of a sudden it becomes a trap for them. For cocaine users who are prone to violence, cocaine makes them more aggressive and violent because inhibitory functions are suppressed in the cingulate gyrus and the temporal lobes. Emotional triggers are overstimulated in the amygdala. The fright center is hyperactivated in the limbic system. So now we have a hyper-violent individual. And of course, if this is the individual that somebody is having sex with, now we got a really serious problem. Because he will, and of course it's never his fault, or her fault, but, well, it's his fault. When cocaine is combined with alcohol, this is ugly. When cocaine is combined with alcohol, the result is a substance called cocaethylene, which causes increased agitation, euphoria, and violence once again. In one study of domestic violence, all the perpetrators had used alcohol on the day of the violence, and 67% had used cocaine with the alcohol. So now we have somebody that is hyper-violent. Cocaethylene is also more likely to induce heart conduction anomalies and may lead to a heart attack. Not that that's a big deal. This substance has a half-life 3 times that of cocaine, and therefore can cause prolonged high blood pressure. So why in the world would somebody drink alcohol with cocaine if they have such negative reactions? And the answer is, it prolongs the half-life 3 times. So whereas it lasts for 5 to 10 minutes, if you drink it with alcohol, if you snort cocaine with alcohol, it'll last for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But, of course, you have no control over yourself, and violence is sometimes the result. This is not happy stuff.
Yeah.
While the brain gains feelings of euphoria and well-being from cocaine, the heart is being abused by the substance. Cocaine causes the heart rate to increase and the blood vessels to constrict, raising blood pressure 20 to 30 units. So if you've got a heart problem, cocaine is not the substance that you should be abusing, or you're going to kill yourself. Small muscle repair stops during its use. So if you snort cocaine an excessive amount, then your heart cannot repair itself. The stress on the heart and the muscle damage being done by its use can cause damage to the heart muscle, coronary arteries, and other blood vessels of the heart. And these people die of heart attacks and heart problems.
What is considered a blood pressure unit? Is it like,
What's normal?
no, what is it?
Oh, it
Top
would-
number or the bottom number?
Well, it's both of them. The top number is the highest level of pressure against your blood vessels, and the other one is the lowest number of pressure. So normally it's somewhere in between.
What's normal?
Normal now is, I think it's 120/70. Maybe it's 130. I think it's 120.
120.
Yeah.
I knew it was 120.
Yeah, it's changed over
I have
time.
high blood pressure.
Yeah, so do
I was
I.
like in the 140s.
Yeah. See, 140 used to be normal, but then they decided it was too high. So they lowered it down to 135, then they lowered it to 130. Now it's down to 120. When I first started in medicine, if you had a 120/60, you came into the emergency room with a 120/60, we thought you had low blood pressure, and we would give you a medication to raise your blood pressure. But now it's normal.
It's 120/80.
120/80, okay, thank you. Yeah, hardly ever have a 120. It's usually a lot higher than that. I was real happy to get it down to 140, so, because that was normal when I first started. So what are we doing? Yeah. Prolonged high blood pressure weakens blood vessel walls in the brain and leads to strokes. Cocaine also causes a curious condition where calcium and fat deposits collect in blood vessels, causing heart attacks or strokes, which is always a lot of fun. So people that snort cocaine don't live as long as people that don't snort cocaine. It's a killer. Yeah, I know. It's their choice. Cocaine crosses the placental barrier, meaning when mom uses or fetus uses, also within seconds. Damage is done to the fetus. As you can imagine, this is a vasoconstrictor. So if it's doing these things to an adult person, you can imagine what it's doing to the fetus. It's a vasoconstrictor, so the growth of the child stops as long as cocaine is in the baby's system. Damage is done to the fetus's blood vessels in a similar reaction to that of the mother, and it may result in miscarriage, stroke, placental separation, or SIDS.
But placental, like it actually just
Placental
separates?
separation?
Like just
Yeah,
grows or-
yeah, the placenta is attached to the uterus. And one of the things that happens after the baby is born is the placenta has to come out. It's an alien structure. It's just there to protect the baby and to feed the baby. So placental separation, the placenta actually starts to separate from the uterine wall while
And then the
the
baby
baby's,
dies.
and the baby dies, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, miscarriage. Spontaneous abortion. One study looking at 717 babies born to cocaine-using mothers found that they were born on an average 1.2 weeks early, 1.2 pounds lighter, 1 inch shorter. Their head circumference was 3/4 of an inch smaller than it's supposed to be. The babies were born agitated, irritable, with high blood pressure, and it is not a pleasant baby to be around. This is a horrible, horrible situation. The baby cries constantly, like a cat. It sounds like a cat caught in the garage door. The baby is usually malnourished because that is the lifestyle of a cocaine-using mother. She doesn't eat. She loses her appetite. Escaping from the cocaine-soaked placental environment does not remove the child from danger. Stimulant users are often inattentive and uncaring about the needs of others, and this includes their infants, which results in emotional deprivation of the child, of course, neglect of the child, and bonding problems. The mother just is not much of a mother. Studies show that rates of mental delays are double among stimulant-exposed children. All is not bleak, of course, with concentrated postnatal care of the child. These infants catch up with their peers by time. There's a little guy out here with a, look, he's got camouflage on. What an outfit.
Man, time you may go have another kid, that's what he's gonna be. That's awesome.
That's gonna be the cutest guy ever. Look at him.
Probably one too.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Tolerance of the euphoric effect begins with the first usage of cocaine. Increased usage has been seen of 25 times the level within days. So whereas before you're using just a little bit of cocaine, now all of a sudden you're snorting the lines of cocaine. This is due to the adaptation of the brain to dopamine stimulation in the nucleus accumbens. Tolerance is to the euphoric effect only, since paranoia increases, as does cardiovascular effects. And if you've ever been around somebody who snorts cocaine, paranoia is their main personality characteristic. They are scared. It's the same way with, marijuana users. Paranoia is very common with these individuals, and it has to do with, it doesn't really have to do with the fact that they're afraid that they're going to be arrested. It's the drug that is causing their paranoia. These guys are really, really paranoid. Withdrawal from cocaine use is very real, despite the misperceptions of researchers into the 1990s. All the crash symptoms become accentuated and prolonged depending on the dosage used, frequency of use, and length of use. Of course, anhedonia is one of the problems with cocaine. Lack of energy, this is when they're off of the cocaine. Emotional depression, loss of motivation, anxiety, vivid and unpleasant dreams, insomnia, increased appetite, psychomotor agitation, and increased craving of the drug. This is what happens when they try to come off this stuff. You remember that Robin Williams was a cocaine user. He had to clean up before he could start acting. When he was a comedian, this type of behavior, the cocaine-induced behavior was humorous, but as a serious actor, of course, he couldn't do that. So that's when he came off the cocaine. Just before he died, he relapsed, went back to treatment, and when he came out of treatment, he realized he had rapid onset Alzheimer's disease. That's when he committed suicide.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. It was all caused by cocaine. I know.
How does it cause Alzheimer's? Just messes with your head?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the way she works. Cycle of quitting and relapse of stimulants. This is something that these guys do a lot. After a binge session with the drug, the individual crashes. They sleep for a prolonged period of time. They awaken with renewed energy and they swear off the drug forever. The individual feels better for a few days and begins to feel as they did before they began using the drug. 7 to 10 days after quitting, the craving starts to build. Energy levels drop. Emotional depression sets in as they can find no pleasure in their surroundings. Remember, anhedonia is very common with these individuals. After a couple of weeks or a month, they relapse, not being able to deal with the depression or the increased craving, cravings that they have. While cocaine overdoses are common, because of the rapid metabolization, the effects are rarely fatal. In large city emergency rooms in 2004, 41% of the visits were due to cocaine usage, most because the individual felt as if they were dying. Usually they feel like they're having a heart attack, so they come in with heart attack symptoms. Of course, you ask them, if they've been using any drugs, and they tell you no, because cocaine's against the law. So you treat them for a heart attack, and then it turns out that they do have heart anomalies, but it's not called, they're not having a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's just a cocaine overdose. The U.S. averages between 2,000 to 3,000 stimulant deaths every year, either from the initial stimulatory stage that causes seizures, hypertension, hyperthermia, stroke, or tachycardia. And so the tachycardia, of course, is the reason that they're coming into to the emergency room. They feel like their heart is, they can't slow their heart down. Or later with the depression stage from the extreme respiratory depression and coma. Some people will experience inverse tolerance where they become more sensitive to cocaine's effects. Long-term cocaine or amphetamine usage can lead to tactile hallucinations called formications. This is really the coolest thing in the whole wide world. They feel like they have bugs crawling all over their skin. And it's called formication. And they will scratch. I don't know if you've ever been around anybody that was a meth head, but yeah, they're always picking at their faces. They're always scratching, and it's because the cocaine makes their hair follicles stand up, straight up, as if they were cold, and that's one of the reasons that they have hyperthermia.
Yeah.
But it makes them stand up, so it's like, you know, goosebumps all over their body on a continual basis. So they're constantly picking at themselves and scratching
I know a
themselves.
girl in high school, she had a contract, model for the Reuters magazine, right?
Oh, wow.
But she got into that, and I don't know, it looks like someone got like a cigarette lighter and went like that all over her.
All over her face, because she's
She
picking at
yeah,
herself.
I was like, oh man, that sucks.
And she was a model.
Oh my God.
I don't mean to laugh. Yes, I do. I mean to laugh. This is stupid.
No, I think it's sucky and funny at the same time.
Yeah, I mean,
But I mean, you do it to yourself, you know?
they're doing it to themselves, exactly. Anyway, the formication, it feels like they have bugs crawling all over. The user will sometimes, and for that reason, my son used to work he was a chef, and so he worked in kitchens. And for some reason, cocaine and meth were real big in the kitchens back in the beginning of the 21st century. And they would shave all the hair off their bodies. So they'd shave their heads, and they'd shave their pubes, and they'd shave their chests and their arms. And you could tell who was using because they didn't have any hair anywhere. So they didn't have hairy arms or hairy knuckles. You know, they'd have to shave all the hair off because they would start scratching themselves. The user will sometimes scratch themselves bloody trying to rid themselves of the imaginary pests. And this is what it looks like. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. Cocaine and methamphetamine usage may also cause dental problems for the users. This is usually caused from poor nutrition, poor dental hygiene, and the acidic effects of the drug. You have to remember that the drugs are acidic. The individual also tends to suffer from dehydration, which causes the gums to recede. And that, of course, when it exposes the roots, now we got a really serious problem. And their teeth fall out, which is always attractive. Seizures are sometimes caused by excessive cocaine or amphetamine usage. 2 to 10% of cocaine users will have seizures, 3 times more women than men, because women are smaller and they have they're just smaller people, so they're more likely to have seizures from the same amount of cocaine. The cocaine and amphetamine users can sometimes suffer from gastrointestinal problems. Ulcers are very common with these individuals. Retroperitoneal fibrosis, visceral infarction, intestinal ischemia, gastrointestinal tract perforation, colonic ischemia. All of this has to do with your intestines. Really strange problems. You don't want to have problems with your intestines. You don't want to go through your life and never have to worry about pooping, okay? Or digesting your food. You never want to have to worry about this stuff. If you do have to worry about it, then it causes all kinds of interesting problems. They'll have to go in and they'll have to resect your bowel, and it's just ugly. Constipation, the constipation caused by heroin usage, You know, can cause a blockage. And if it does cause a blockage, they're gonna have to do a laparotomy where they open your guts up and try to find the blockage. And hopefully it's on the surface, it's close to the surface, so they don't have to dig around in your guts. Yeah, I know, this sounds horrible, but the reality is people are doing it to themselves. And cocaine causes all of these problems. So yeah, you've got a problem with your nose, you've got problems with your guts, you've got problems with your heart potentially if you snort too much, and you're going to really screw yourself up. Another possible side effect of cocaine usage comes from dopamine changes in the cerebellum from cocaine or amphetamine toxicity. The individual suffers from involuntary writhing, flailing, jerking, or sinuous movements of the arms and legs. This is sometimes referred to as meth or crack dancing. If you go to this website, you can watch somebody crack dance, which is, he's just jerking around. He can't control himself. He's just dancing around. It's really kind of fascinating. Crack dancing. Schizophrenia is caused from too much dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. It is normally caused by a hereditary imbalance or a disease state that affects this area. Since cocaine and amphetamines increase dopamine in this area, it can trigger stimulant-induced paranoid schizophrenia. The main effects are auditory, visual, or tactile hallucinations and paranoid delusions, as much fun as that sounds. You never know. You just never know. You start using this stuff and all of a sudden you just pop yourself right into schizophrenia. And there's nothing you can do about it. You're gone. You're schizophrenic and you will be that way the rest of your life. And unfortunately, it doesn't react to medications very well. The drug induced.
To my buddy, I think I told you, he's so fucked up, come back from, I think we were in Al Asad, and he started smoking dope, and he became schizophrenic.
Yeah.
Sad.
Well, it's one of the things that they don't even talk about as far as marijuana is concerned. It can kick you into schizophrenia. If you have that proclivity to be schizophrenic, then it will knock you right into schizophrenia. Just
So
like
he was smoking a lot. He like for himself, and he would last like 4 days. I don't know how much. That's a lot of fucking dope.
Yeah, it's way too much. Stimulant-induced psychosis is impossible to differentiate from organic psychosis. Psychotic symptoms may disappear with abstinence, but it may take hours, days, or even months. 1/3 to 1/2 of chronic cocaine users will develop mild transient paranoia. With repeated use after a psychotic episode, smaller and smaller doses will trigger psychotic episodes. And this is something, if you've ever had a psychotic episode, then if you ever use again, it's going to kick you into a psychotic episode.
What does it mean?
Psychotic episode? That means you act schizophrenic for a select period of time. For a month, for a day, for a week. So you have, whereas you are you right now, as somebody with schizophrenia, you act erratically, you have paranoid delusions and whatnot. And this may last for an extended length of time. Usually, you gotta remember, the human brain doesn't want to be sick, it wants to be normal. So if you develop schizophrenia and you start acting erratically, your brain doesn't want to do that. So it tries to heal itself. So you usually, your life is like this, where you're inducing yourself to have psychotic episodes, your brain doesn't like it, so it tries to recover. It tries to do anything it can to recover for you not to be psychotic anymore. But this is a prolonged period. I mean, a month of psychosis is a long, long time. It's the same way with depression. Your brain doesn't want to be depressed. So your brain will try to, it will increase the number of serotonin receptor sites in order to make you less likely to be depressed. But of course, the drugs, they just change everything completely, unfortunately. Polydrug use is very common among cocaine users because the individual may need chemical assistance to come down off their stimulation. The most common drug used with cocaine or alcohol, which is stupid because cocaethylene that we just talked about. Heroin, which is a sedative, which is a depressant. And so that if you're high on cocaine, all of a sudden you can shoot up with heroin, and now all of a sudden you're not as high as you were before. Sedative hypnotics, of course, which have the same effect. Nicotine, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because nicotine is also a stimulant. A person who smokes cigarettes is 22 times more likely to use cocaine than a non-smoker. So we're looking for stimulation. While the purity of cocaine coming into the country averages 80 to 90%, most marketed cocaine has been cut with substances to increase profits. This is what Scott was talking about the other day. So it comes in at 80 to 90%.
Someone was to
pure.
pure it straight, it'll kill them.
Yeah, so they're cutting it so that they can make more profit off of it. They use baby laxative, lactose, vitamin B, aspirin, mannitol, sugar, tetracaine or procaine. They use anything that will make them more profit.
Like resemble the white powder?
And yeah, it just has to be a white powder. As cool as that is, powdered sugar. It's not that uncommon.
Gold medal flour.
Gold medal flour, I don't know about that. That
Oh,
makes
no,
sense.
it's used.
Yeah. Injecting any drug is dangerous, but injecting street drugs is especially dangerous. The user can never be sure of the purity of the drug. The drug may be contaminated with dangerous substances that are not meant to be introduced into the human body. As we saw, a lot of these things, I'm not exactly sure if you want to be injecting mannitol or sugar or lactose. I don't know why you'd be injecting these things. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Bacteria and viruses may be introduced. 50 to 90% of IV drug users are infected with hepatitis C from using contaminated needles. This is not a happy story. Manufacturers and refiners of cocaine have known that in the paste or freebase state, cocaine could be smoked without destroying the euphoric properties. Okay, so you can't smoke cocaine. You can't take the powder and put it on a cigarette and smoke it and get high. It doesn't work. The cocaine cooks at too low a temperature, so you cook away all the good stuff. But if you have a freebase, you have a paste made out of that cocaine, then you can cook it and you can still get the euphoric effect. When freebase is mixed with marijuana and smoked, it is referred to as basuco, or pasta. This form of ingestion gives the user a more intense and immediate effect than snorting the cocaine.
It's usually called a Cocoa Puff.
Cocoa Puff.
Yeah, I never heard of bazooka.
Okay. It's probably,
I guess it's, that's where you're from.
this guy's from Oregon.
Oh.
The other. Crack and freebase has 4 properties that make it a sought commodity. The melting point is higher, it's 195 degrees as compared to the powder, which is 98 degrees. I mean, it's logical that it would melt at 98 degrees. That way it gets into your system faster if you snort it. It reaches the brain faster than when you smoke it. Remember, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes for the cocaine to kick in. This form is more readily absorbed by the fat cells in the brain, giving it a more intense reaction. Higher doses of cocaine can be ingested in shorter periods of time if you freebase. So a lot of people were freebasers, but you got to cook it. And so what are you going to use to cook it with? Well, the best thing that they found was ether. But ether is highly inflammable. But there is a problem with ether. Ether is a gas and a liquid at the same time. So if I poured ether on the table, it would run off the table and it would be on the ground. So the problem is you can't contain it, ether. Ricky Nelson, the famous Ricky Nelson, was in an airplane and they were taking off, and there were people in the front of the airplane who were freebasing. And unfortunately, they dropped the can of ether. And when they dropped the can of ether, it just ran all the way down to the tail. The ether did. Now, of course, they're freebasing, so they're burning it, they're heating it. And the fire got into the ether, and of course, now we've got a whole trail of fire, and the plane blew up and killed everybody on board.
Oh, because of Craig.
Oh, for a time. The same thing, a very similar thing happened to Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor was freebasing in his house, and you gotta burn off all the ether, that's the problem. So when he didn't burn off all the ether, it went down into his lungs, and then it caught fire, and it singed him, burned off all the skin on his face, burned him all the way down into his lungs. And they didn't think they were gonna be able to save him, but they did. Eventually they saved him. Of course, he died. And he came back as a comedian. He was still pretty funny. And he joked about, cooking his face and turning himself white because he burned off all of his skin.
Well,
I know.
have your sense of humor still intact, I
There you
guess.
go. But he died relatively young, unfortunately. It reaches the brain faster. This form is more readily absorbed by the fat cells. And of course, this is one of the reasons why people freebase. Any smoked cocaine product will produce a more intense effect than snorted cocaine. This is true even though most of the cocaine product is lost in the air, 75% in a pipe or 50% in a cigarette. Hence, more cocaine has to be smoked to get a strong effect. Even when cocaine is smoked or injected, the drug is metabolized fairly rapidly. If you snort it, you only get 5 to 10 minutes of euphoria. If you smoke it, you only get 15 to 20 minutes. So we're not talking about a whole lot, a long length of time. Crack gives a rush that only lasts a few seconds, and euphoria and excitation that only lasts a few minutes, 5 to 20 minutes. As soon as the effect dissipates, the individual feels irritable, dysphoric, or dysphoric, which means uneasy or anxious. For this reason, crack is almost always smoked in a binge pattern. If you've ever been around somebody who has crystal meth or cocaine, they'll use up their whole stash. They just use it up. And it's not like I'm going to share it with anybody else because I'm not getting that much of a buzz off of it. So they tend to use it in a binge pattern. Marijuana, of course, a lot of people share their marijuana, so it's a kind of a community project. Cocaine and amphetamines are not that way. If you've got crystal meth, you use it, and you use it all yourself. You don't want to share it with anybody. Crack does have some fairly unpleasant side effects. It makes you thirsty, it makes you cough, gives you tremors, so you can tell. Remember, these guys are crack dancing, but they also have the shakes. They have tremors when they're not using. Dry skin, which is always attractive. Slurred speech, blurred vision, crack keratitis, abrasion of the eye from lighting the pipe. The pipe's not very long. You don't want it to be too long, otherwise you don't get any effect. So it's got to be a short pipe, and here they're lighting it. A lot of times, if they have the fire too high, they'll burn their eyeball. Cracked thumb hands, burns on hands and callus on thumb from lighting a crack pipe. It's the old Bic. Okay. Crack burns, facial burns from lighting the pipe, and of course it's a really short pipe, and that's one of the reasons why we have all these problems. Psychological side effects of smoking crack: paranoia, of course, craving for the drug, asocial behavior. Remember, if you are a user, you want to use it all yourself. You don't want to share it with anybody, and it makes you fairly asocial. Attention problems, irritability, drug dreams, hyperexcitability, visual and auditory hallucinations, depression, cocaine psychosis, high-risk sexual behavior, because all of a sudden the things that made you happy before, as far as sex was concerned, it ain't working that way anymore. And you've got to, just in order to have any kind of sexual reaction at all, it has to be an extreme reaction. It has to be an extreme sexual behavior in order for you to be able to have sex. Respiratory side effects from smoking crack, chest pains, pneumonia, coughs, crack lung, which is a decreased ability to diffuse your CO2, so you don't breathe deeply enough, which is a really serious problem. So you have CO2 buildup in your lungs. Hemorrhaging, remember, it happens in your nose, it happens all over your body. Any place that the cocaine comes in contact with, it's a vasoconstrictor. As soon as the cocaine isn't there anymore, the blood vessel opens up, and if you've done any damage to that blood vessel, it will hemorrhage, and you can't stop the damn thing. Oh God, it's so ugly. I can remember one guy came in after he snorted cocaine, had a really bad hemorrhage in his nose, and we went in there and we cauterized the blood vessel, and we thought everything was okay, and he stood up, and as soon as he stood up, it just popped again. And so here we're, and you know, he's bleeding down his face, and we're trying to stop it, and we've got pads all over, and we're trying to catch it in an emesis basin. And we went back in, the doctor went back in, he cauterized it again, and he made him stay down for 20 minutes. As soon as he stood up again, popped again. Oh God, what a mess. And the nurses were pissed. They were so angry because they were spending so much time with this guy. And of course, they only come in when we've had a gunshot over in room 1 and a car crash. And you got a kid, you've got a mother that you need to take care of, and here's this guy with a hemorrhaging blood vessel that you can't stop. And they'll call nurses down from ICU, CCU, and they'll bring in lab techs to hold the pads. That's when they brought me in. And so I'm standing there holding this thing on his nose. And of course, it's my fault if it hemorrhages again, right? Because I was the one holding it.
Yeah.
Respiratory failure, of course, is a problem. Death due to anesthetization of the respiratory center in the medulla, and that's how you die. Crack or freebase can be mixed with marijuana to create caviar, champagne, Grimmies, Fry Daddies, Cocoa Pops, just like Scott was saying. And these are all nicknames from different areas of the country.
Woolies, it must be,
Woolies?
I don't know, like your neck of the woods or something.
Yeah. This is, Chicago, New York.
Hubba.
Hubba. Hubba Bubba?
Hubba.
Used to be a bubble gum.
Yeah.
Users may combine crack with PCP or ketamine to make space basing, plaque, or tragic magic. This is dangerous stuff. This is really dangerous
That
stuff.
sounds inviting, tragic magic.
This stuff will kill you. Mixing crack with tar coke, heroin creates speedball, hot rocks, or Belushi rocks. That's what John Belushi was being injected with when he overdosed. His girlfriend injected him. When crack or cocaine is mixed with wine, it is called crack coolers. In 2004, 4,500 deaths occurred from the direct and indirect effects of cocaine. Cocaine overdose doesn't always kill, but results in tachycardia and hyperventilation, accompanied by a feeling of impending death. And that's why they come into the emergency room. The tachycardia, of course, their heart, they have a racing heart, and they are breathing too shallowly, and so they come in thinking they're having a heart attack. Death usually results from cardiac arrest, which possibly they will die of cardiac arrest, seizures, stroke, respiratory failure, or hyperthermia. Because using crack can lead to risky sexual behavior, children are sometimes produced in circumstances that are not optimum. You have a lot of crack babies. The women are selling themselves for another dosage. So they are having sex when they probably should be abstaining, but they're not. They are having sex and they're creating children, which they don't want. They didn't want them to begin with. They just wanted to have sex so that they could get more crack. Crack smokers have social problems and they don't relate to their own offspring any better than they do to other people. Remember, amphetamines, speed, amphetamines, crystal meth, all of this separates you from other people. You want to stay away from other people. People can't make you happy. Besides, they might want to use your stuff, and of course you don't want that to happen. So this creates an antisocial individual. Crack smokers show high rates of neglect, abandonment, and abuse of their children. There are high rates of single and no-parent families. Women willing to trade sex for crack are very common, and then it starts all over again. These are the individuals, and let's pick on Pinyon just one more time. There were cases in Pinyon of women selling their babies, their children, so that they could get crystal meth.
Jeez.
When?
When?
That's fucked up, man.
I never heard of this.
Oh my goodness gracious. See, you don't hear the good stuff. Or selling their children into prostitution so they could get more stuff.
I never heard of this before.
All right, it's good. Well, I'm glad that you weren't running with that crowd.
No.
That's a good thing. The physical and mental effects of cocaine and amphetamines are similar. Cocaine is about twice as expensive. Cocaine gives a greater rush and more intense high than amphetamines, but amphetamines allow for more prolonged energy. Amphetamines' effect will last 6 to 9 times longer, so it's economically it makes more sense to use amphetamines. Amphetamines are more likely to cause addiction than cocaine because they last longer. Amphetamines are synthetic stimulants that provide similar effects as cocaine, but it's cheaper and it's of course more prolonged. Amphetamines are called upper speed, crack, crystal, ice, shabu, glass. These are just some of the names. Well, you're from San Diego, okay?
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of those are common with shabu. What is it?
Chicago. Remember, there was a direct connection between the Sinaloa cartel and Chicago.
This probably with the vice lords or the freaking disciples.
Yeah, well, you were just having to bring it across the border, you're right there. Chicago is 2 days away.
Really?
Yeah, so, and they had good stuff up there. I mean, anyway, they were getting it up there. Amphetamines can be snorted, they can be injected, they can be ingested orally. Worldwide, 33 million people used amphetamines and methamphetamines in 2003. Speed used to come in several forms. Amphetamines, okay. I got a short story to tell you. My first wife, when she left me, decided that she would go back home. I was stationed in Lubbock, Texas at the time. She went back to Indiana and she started working at a truck stop. And at that truck stop, you didn't make that much money, the tips weren't that good. But if you dealt amphetamines to the truck drivers, then you can make a lot of money. So that's what she started doing. She started pushing drugs. She was a waitress. She started pushing drugs. And so she's not a very subtle person, so fairly quickly the police knew that she was one of the people pushing drugs. So yeah, okay. The rest of the story's not that pretty. So they arrested her and they told her, we're gonna let you go, but you need to give us your supplier. And 2 days later, she jumped on a bus and she came back down to Lubbock, Texas. To me, she came back to me. Isn't this attractive? She came back to me with 2 suitcases, and one suitcase had her clothes in it, and the other suitcase had drugs in it. And it had amphetamines, she had a whole baggie full of, a trash bag full of marijuana. So she had this whole bag.
Did you live on base?
I lived off base.
Okay.
I lived off base. And they were cross tops and white crosses is what they were.
What
So
was she doing? She's
She
like,
just opened up shop, Bruce.
she was like, hey, you want some drugs? Is that
So
what she was doing?
well, my job in the service, I was a lab tech, remember?
Just be like, hey, you got CQ, I got you.
Guess who's the one that did all the urine testing?
You did?
I did, yeah, I did all the urine testing.
Hey.
Yeah, so I was a narc, that was my job, and here my wife comes down with a whole suitcase full of drugs. So I threw it away, I threw everything away. She said, you thrown away $10,000 worth of stuff.
Oh, gosh.
And she's right, I threw away $10,000 worth of stuff, which is probably $100,000 today. But this was in the 1970s. But that was my job. My job was to catch people who
Tell you these a bitch.
were users. So I just threw it away. And of course she got mad.
Well, yeah, it's profit.
And they're called, what'd you say, cross tops and,
Yeah, cross tops just have a plus on the top of
I
it.
think I've actually seen those, I think I've actually seen those.
I mean, she wasn't out $10,000. She was just out the $10,000. She had been given the drugs.
The front,
To sell, and then she took off. So we had two people, we had the cops from Indiana were chasing her, and the drug dealers were also chasing her at the same time.
so which one?
But then we moved on to base after that. We moved on to base and it protected everybody.
Scott?
It protected us.
No.
Anyway, so that's my run-in with crazy ladies.
Dang, you just.
It was after that she stabbed me, so.
Yeah.
Biphetamine are also known as Dexedrine are known as Dexies or Beans. Benzedrine is known as Bennies. These are all drugs from the 1970s, 1960s, and 1970s. Methadone, of course, is another drug. Amphetamines were first synthesized in 1887. Was used by both sides during World War II. The Japanese, the Nazis, and the Allies used
Shoot,
all of these
that
drugs.
stuff like candy, man.
My dad was a truck driver for, this is before he joined the military. In 1940, there were, in northern Indiana was a ammunition factory. And in southern Indiana was where the ammunition was stored. So that there was a route that they had to take, and if they could stay awake for 24 hours, they could make 2 trips. Everything was a 2-lane highway. So they had all these ammunition trucks. And so they gave my dad amphetamines, and they said, well, you know, if you can make 2 trips in a day, then we'll pay you, double overtime or whatever. Anyway, and they gave him these amphetamines to take. But my dad doesn't do drugs, and he didn't do it. He wouldn't, but he could still stay awake for 24 hours. So he would make that trip, drinking coffee the whole time. But he's not sensitive to caffeine, that's the bizarre part. But they did give him the amphetamines, and so he had, and they give him a box of like 4, and in a little box, and he would just put them in his pocket and never do anything with them. And of course,
So you just collected them?
yeah, so like in the 1960s or 1970s, I'm going through his stuff, and here's these little boxes of amphetamines. By this time, they probably weren't good anymore. I'm sure they weren't, but
Yeah.
anyway, they were still boxes of amphetamines. Was used as a diet pill in the 1950s and 1960s. The hippies fueled their psychedelic experience with street speed, marijuana, and LSD. Amphetamines became a Schedule II drug in 1970. Why in the world did we decide in 1970? We'd been using them for decades, then all of a sudden in 1970 they became a Schedule II drug. Why would that happen? There's the answer right there. Richard Nixon was president of the United States. We were having anti-war
Protests?
Yeah, protests there, like daily in Washington DC, and it really pissed him off. And he needed a way to control the hippies. And so the way he did it was to make marijuana and amphetamines Schedule II drugs, and that way they could arrest these people for possession.
Yeah.
Political, it all has to do with politics. Street chemists began producing crank, methamphetamine sulfate, and crystal methamphetamine hydrochloride in the 1980s and 1990s. These chemists were able to convert the active chemicals in cold medications, phenylpropanolamine, ephedrine, and pseudoephedrine into crank and crystal, and that's one of the reasons why they took.
My neighborhood, all the, like Sudafed and all that stuff is locked up.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it is now. It is
Yeah.
practically every state.
Really?
It is-
Yeah, there was only like big cities.
No, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah, but bashes you can't even buy.
Can't even buy hairspray.
You can't buy a
I
lot
mean,
of.
you can, but it's in a case.
Yeah, you have to get somebody to unlock it. In the 1990s, a new stronger methamphetamine began to be produced called ice, glass, Batu, or Shabu. It was dextroisomer methamphetamine. This form later came to be known as crystal meth, Tina, peanut butter, deadhead, chalk, tweak, yellow rock glass, rose quartz, speed. This
There's
is
some
strong
stuff, well, you know my past, you know.
Yeah.
They basically put like fuel in it. It wasn't like JP8 or nothing like that, but it was some kind of jet fuel. But it turned like almost infantry blue. Like
Oh.
sky blue.
Oh, wait a
And you
minute.
needed half of what you would take
Right.
to get the same effect.
When this stuff hit the streets, we had a lot of overdoses.
The guys who freaking make this stuff,
Yeah.
they're fucking smart.
Oh, sure.
No, but you have to be like, know all the chemicals
Oh,
and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're chemists, obviously. Sure. Breaking Bad, wasn't that a television show about somebody
My,
cooking some really good stuff?
my cousin Raul, he was one in LA, in Norwalk,
Mhm.
Southeast. That's by like Whittier, Bellflower, Artesia.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what he did. But then he's a pastor now.
Cooking this stuff stinks. It smells so
It
bad.
smells like burnt plastic with
Rotten
trash.
eggs. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something rotten. And it gets into the wood, it gets into the plastic, it gets into anything. And there's nothing you
the
can.
wrong thing, fucking explode, man.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's very, very
'Cause I
flammable.
always knew who was doing it because he would always have his gloves about. He goes, I'll be back in a month. I go, I'm gonna go over to Burger King Bros. Do what you do, man.
The profile of a typical methamphetamine user is a white male. He's between 19 and 40. He lives in the West and especially Hawaii, which, anyway. An equal number of women have used the drugs as men, only in Hawaii, of course. Methamphetamine is particularly rampant in the gay community, where it is the third most popular drug after alcohol and marijuana. Amphetamines can be cooked in laboratory facilities. Initially, biker gangs cooked the drugs. Hell's Angels and the Gypsy Jokers were the first two, but now, of course, it's
True,
Gypsy Jokers.
Bongos, Bandidos, the 81s,
Yeah,
and there used to be one on the East Coast called the Chingalings.
yeah. These guys have gone now, the Gypsy Jokers,
Yeah, I
the
never heard of them.
Hell's Angels wiped them all out. Recently, Mexican gangs have taken over the manufacture. The DEA estimates that there are over 300 ways to manufacture methamphetamines from pseudoephedrine, and for this reason, cold medicine has been controlled and put behind the counter, and that is a federal law. So it's not just in the cities, it's everywhere. Snorting methamphetamine is more toxic to the nasal mucosa than snorting cocaine, and it may cause irritation and pain. The most intense high comes from injecting amphetamines directly into the bloodstream. Unfortunately, it causes sclerosis and pain from the injection site. Methamphetamine is extremely bitter and takes much longer to get the effect to the brain. Amphetamines last 4 to 6 hours. Remember, cocaine was only up to 20 minutes, and this stuff lasts for hours compared to 10 to 90 minutes for cocaine. Amphetamines force the increase of the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine because it forces the release of these neurotransmitters from terminal vesicles. It reverses the reabsorption pumps, forcing more neurotransmitter into the synapse, and enzymes that metabolize the neurotransmitters are blocked by amphetamines. Okay, so we've got all of this juice, we've got all of these neurotransmitters in our synaptic cleft, and it can't get out. Prolonged use of amphetamines reduces the body's ability to produce the effective neurotransmitters. Research shows norepinephrine reduction as long as 6 months after drug use has ceased. Now remember, norepinephrine makes you feel like you can function, like you're on top of the world. So if all of a sudden you don't have this, now all of a sudden you're depressed, you can't be happy anymore. Research also shows a 24% reduction of dopamine resulting in difficulty in feeling pleasure. Thus, after heavy use for the individual to feel normal, they have to use the drug. Otherwise, they don't feel good. Alcohol does the same thing to you, but it has to do with GABA and serotonin. Methamphetamine also causes a degeneration of serotonin-producing cells. You're going to feel really good, okay, for like as long as you use this stuff, but as soon as you stop, you can't feel happy anymore. Your happiness is gone. Your body doesn't have the ability to feel happy. Your serotonin has been reduced, your dopamine has been reduced by 24%. Norepinephrine is going to stay reduced for 6 months.
And you're gonna crash hard.
It's going to be a big time crash. Research of methamphetamine users found that they had 11.3% reduction in gray matter of their hippocampus, their cingulate gyrus, their paralimbic cortices. These areas affect your craving, your mood, your emotions, and your memory. Whew. Okay. Okay, so we get what they call meth head. Meth head has to do with inability, you're not as smart as you were before, just because you took methamphetamines. It lasts for 18 months. Why? Because the hippocampus has been, the gray matter in the hippocampus has been reduced. However, brains and methamphetamines are actually larger due to swelling, and it has to do with the liquid. It has to do with edema. It has to do with edema. Amphetamines cause increased energy, increased heart rate, raised body temperature, rapid respiration, higher blood pressure, dilation of bronchial vessels, appetite suppression. So there you go, you don't have to eat so much. Binging on amphetamines can result in not sleeping for 3 to 10 days. This is very common.
It's a long time without sleep.
It's not just a long time without sleep, but you tend to have psychotic episodes after 2 days. So you can imagine not sleeping for 10 days, how psychotic you're going to feel.
Oh my God.
Tolerance of amphetamine is fairly rapid and extreme. A normal dosage is 15 to 30 milligrams. Long-term users may use as much as 5,000 milligrams a day, whereas a normal dose is 15 to 30 milligrams. They're using 5,000 milligrams.
And that's like,
That's a shitload, man.
Effects on these individuals: sleep deprivation, there's a shock for you, heart toxicity, blood vessel toxicity, severe malnutrition, overdose may result in convulsions, hyperthermia, cardiovascular collapse. We've had these people in the hospital, especially speed freaks. This is before methamphetamines were popular. They die of old age in their 30s. They just die. Their bodies are done. Doing an autopsy is like, I don't know, their blood vessels are fragile, and they'll pop if you touch them.
yeah.
I mean, just stupid stuff. Well, they're killing themselves. As much fun as it is. Unlike most drugs, amphetamines are abused as much or more by women than men. Of course, women do it so that they can lose weight, that whole heroin chic thing. This may lead to use during pregnancy, which results in irritable baby syndrome, intolerance to light and touch. They have tremors, which never go away, muscle coordination problems, abnormal reflexes, sucking and swallowing problems, disturbed sleep.
Isn't that what was in, remember that guy, Fen?
Yeah,
Was in there?
yeah. Well, Fen are two different types of amphetamines. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But if you lose a lot of weight on it, it's really good for you. Anyway, so you can imagine the babies are not in very good shape. I was working in NICU during, when cocaine first became really popular with wealthy people. And we had a lot of babies born that were strung out on cocaine. Ugly, it is ugly. It is no fun at all. They scream like cats. And they never stop because they're in pain. You know, there's nothing you can do. They also get born with a lot of abnormalities. No skull, no skull. We had the heart on the outside of the chest cavity. We had one baby was born with only half a kidney. Oh God, it's just horrible.
So
Can it
like,
cause Down syndrome too?
I'm sorry?
Can it cause Down syndrome too?
No,
No?
no, it has to do with an extra chromosome on the 21st pair. Other problems that might occur from a baby born to a methamphetamine user is premature delivery, of course, congenital deformities, clubfoot or limb abnormalities, gastric problems, intestines protruding into the stomach. We've had, you don't want to hear that. Placental separation and hemorrhage being potentially lethal to both the mother and the baby. Intrauterine brain hemorrhage and stroke. HIV, of course, hepatitis B and C. Whatever she has, he has, or the baby has. And of course, a lot of times they don't survive. If the baby survives gestation, which is it's very common for them not to survive gestation, they may have developmental problems, growth and developmental delays, learning disabilities, as you can imagine, increased incidence of ADHD, which isn't really ADHD, it just looks like ADHD. Increased risk for rage disorder, greater incidence of SIDS, disability rates range around 33%. Amphetamines produce mild, intense euphoria, alertness, sexual feelings, sense of well-being and confidence. After prolonged use, irritability, paranoia, anxiety, aggression, mental confusion, poor judgment, impaired memory, hallucinations. Okay.
that's a short list.
Since amphetamines cause an abundance of neurotransmitters that mimic sexual gratification, using the drug becomes a substitute for sexual activity. Amphetamines will also produce violence in people prone to violence because the drug causes people to be suspicious, paranoid, and overconfident. Oh, God. This proclivity for violence among meth users can lead to child abuse and neglect. In Oregon in 2004, 1,850 meth labs were busted, and a full 80% of the child abuse and neglect cases involved meth users. What a shock.
So in one state, it was just 1,815.
There were that many meth labs that were busted in Oregon. Remember Oregon, you know, they got their own words for all of these things.
Yeah.
Excessive amphetamine usage can lead to amphetamine psychosis, just as with cocaine, hallucinations, loss of contact with reality, speech patterns that are indistinguishable from paranoid schizophrenia. Since these symptoms are caused by excess dopamine released by the drug, psychotic episodes can be induced at fairly low doses in individuals prone to excess dopamine. Some individuals may have immediate psychosis, while others may use for years with no problem. That's a rarity. Usually they have some kind of psychosis. Crystal meth seems to have the strongest effect on the brain chemistry, and since it has fewer cardiovascular effects, can be smoked in larger quantities. The result is more severe, of course. The paranoia is more severe, the hallucinations are more severe, hypervigilant thinking, suicidal depression, addictive use. And of course, suicidal depression is not that uncommon with people on amphetamines. ADHD is caused from a depletion of dopamine. Amphetamines are used to treat ADHD because they increase dopamine and they block its metabolism. Methylphenidate, 10 million prescriptions per year are written for children for Ritalin. Adderall, 7.7 million prescriptions per year. Strattera, 5.8 million prescriptions per year. And Pimaline, or Siler, is a relatively new one, and it is also used for ADHD. Amphetamines work on ADHD 75% of the time. Now, what have we seen? We've seen a lot of symptoms that are similar to ADHD. So because doctors don't really do much of a workup as far as ADHD is concerned, that's what we see a lot of cases that aren't really ADHD that will not respond to any of the amphetamines. So we have a lot of people that are diagnosed with ADHD who have problems at home. They don't really have ADHD. There are lots of things that look like ADHD. It's kind of like a cold. Everything looks like the flu, including leukemia, all kinds of things. Research shows mononucleosis. Research. I'm sorry?
Sorry, is that why they catch things too late?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're diagnosing something as something's easy. They want it to be ADHD because it's easy to treat. Just throw pills at
No, but I mean like people who like have like.
leukemia.
Yeah.
Yeah. The person comes in, they have flu-like symptoms. They look at them. They don't see any reason to do blood work on them, so they treat them for the flu. Usually they send them home and tell them to take ibuprofen. But it doesn't go away. So then they come in the next week, and the next week when they come in, they still have the same symptoms. The flu should have been over with.
Well, can't they like, I don't know, is there anything that they can stop leukemia?
Yeah, we can treat it now. Once upon a time we couldn't.
Well, I mean, if it's early enough, within like.
Yeah, we can treat it.
stages.
We can cure people of leukemia. When I first started working in medicine, 70% of all the kids diagnosed with leukemia died within a year. Now it's more like 30%. Well, it's even less than that. It's a lot less because now we have treatments for leukemia. We can give them bone marrow transplant, a lot of different things. So, yeah, and the biggest problem is it looks like they've got the flu. The doctor doesn't want to do blood work because then he can't get reimbursement from the insurance company if it's the flu. So he doesn't do the blood work, and they don't ever detect it. Sometimes in the beginning, leukemia doesn't really look that much like leukemia. They start having symptoms, but the blood work isn't all that positive. You need somebody who's been in the game for a long time to be able to identify it properly. You need somebody to actually look at the damn blood, is what you need. But see, they don't even do that anymore. They don't look at the blood anymore. They have a machine.
Surface, huh?
They have a machine that looks at the blood. And machines don't have the same brains that humans have. So, well, anyway, we need to stop right
I
here.
guess if you would just, well, I guess if you've been practicing medicine 30+ years, you just know,
Well, I mean, I've seen so much leukemia, especially working